Come join Melissa and her guests on the Chats from the Blog Cabin podcast. From North Carolina, this podcast will have you feeling like you've known these folks for years. Listen in as they chat about life, culture, current events, and more, all with a special Southern flair. Curl up with your favorite beverage and get ready to be entertained. Tune in now for a unique experience that's fun and insightful.
Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of Chats from the Blog Cabin. You know, the show where I virtually invite people into the Blog Cabin to chat. And today are joined by R.H. Bird, or Ray, as he told me to call him. He is the author of Prom-Posal, which actually, when you think about Prom-Posals, you think about the girl's point of view of actually getting the proposal, not the guy's point of view. So I love that your book is written from the guy's point of view. But before we get into the book, tell us a little about yourself, Ray.
Okay. Well, I live in Las Vegas. I grew up in New York, married my college sweetheart, who I met at a college in New York too, and worked in Wall Street my whole life and through the 90s. And then I guess the big item that happened in our life was that I was there the day of when 9/11 happened. And we were not in the Twin Towers, but we were right across from the Twin Towers. I saw the Twin Towers fall. We brought survivors home to our house that night and watched the buildings burn for really months after. Other people didn't see it, but we saw it every day. We just saw the fires going, and you're like, why can't they ever put those flames out? But anyway, shortly after that, my wife and I had a conversation, and we said, maybe we don't want to live around New York anymore. It's might be a little bit dangerous. You know, might be another terrorist attack. If they're going to hit anywhere, they're probably still going to hit New York. So we talked about it a little bit, and one day she said, what about Vegas? And I said, what about Vegas? And that was about the extent of our conversation. About a month later, we're closing on a house, and we moved out to Las Vegas. And it was me and our 3 daughters at the time, and got a job out here, still on Wall Street. And things were going well. Then around 2008, 2009, I started to feel a little sick, and that feeling a little sick grew over about a 1 or 2 year period where it just progressively started to get slowly worse and worse and worse, and then misdiagnosed. And all of a sudden one day, I met with a neurologist after meeting with a million other doctors, and they said, you have multiple sclerosis. And I was like, MS? And he was like, yeah. I'm like, well, I knew one person who had that once, way back a long time, and I remember having an assembly in school about it, but that was my only experience of knowing anyone with MS. I never, nobody in my family ever had it, no family history of it, but all of a sudden had it. And things were going great in my life. But then all of a sudden, God says, hey, I think you want to go in a different direction right now. And ended up having to retire early at around 2009 from Wall Street with MS. And my life has been quite different since then. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. But it's my wife, and my 3 daughters are out here too. We just got a dog, little Jerry. I closed the door so he can't come in right now because he does a lot. But hopefully he doesn't sneak in. Sometimes he has a way of pushing it in.
That's okay. I'm all for people sneaking their pets in because I love to see them on the screen. I'm a big pet person too. So there's 2 things in that bio that you just talked about that I want to go back and talk a little bit about. First of all, it's 9/11. I can't even imagine. I saw it on TV, so I can't even imagine what you felt when you actually were there at Ground Zero. That was something.
Yeah, I was. It was one of those absolutely gorgeous fall New York days, probably 75 degrees, beautiful sunny day, just wearing a shirt like this, to work, no jacket or anything like that. And I remember I was a little bit late, and I turned the corner, and all of a sudden I saw the first plane hit, and I'm stuck in traffic, and I'm looking around at the other cars because I'm thinking to myself, did I just see what I think I just saw? And dead stop traffic, and I'm looking around, and no one else has this really incredible or incredulous look on their face. So, and the sight, and I'm seeing the fireball, and I'm seeing everything, and I'm thinking maybe it's just the sun glaring off there because it's such a gorgeous day. Maybe I'm not really seeing it because I'm the only one who's having this crazy look on my face. Then they start changing all the radio stations, and no one has anything going on because it literally just hit. Then after about 5 or 6 minutes, there was a radio, like an all news station that had a traffic copter up by the George, and all of a sudden they said, "Hey, I think there's something going down at the World Trade Center." And I don't know how they got somebody down there right away, but they had a reporter on the street right away, and everybody was saying, "Oh, it's just a small plane hit. It was just a small plane hit, and that's all it was." But at least now I know, okay, yeah, a plane did hit. So I'm driving along, and then I finally I can watch it the whole time, but then I had to turn off to get to my parking lot, and I couldn't see anymore. And as I couldn't see, somebody said another plane just hit, and I thought that's probably not true. Somebody must have. It might be a gag. Sometimes people call in on news stations and give false info. I'm like, oh, that must be fake. It couldn't possibly be happening. So I parked my car, and then I'm walking to the office building, and everybody's running the other way. But I was one of the executives at the company at the time, so I was like, no, I have to go in and show leadership and all that type of thing. So I'm walking to the building, and I turn the corner, and sure enough, I see both buildings on fire. And I get into the office, and the president finds me, and I was in charge of the website at the time, what went out, what customers saw. And he said, "Ray, we got to put up a message that's, of course, it's the day I'm late, right? Ray, we got to put up a message that says the New York Stock Exchange is postponed their opening." So I took care of that. And then we went to the windows. Everybody went to the windows and was just watching it. You could see it perfectly from our building. And you could just see it both burning. And then you had the news on, the TV was right above the windows, and we all had the news on. You're listening to it, and you're watching it go on at the same time. And it was just, very, very, very insane. The craziest part of it, and it always surprises me that they never show it, was after the first building fell, and there was just the one building standing. That was the strangest sight, because you're used to your whole life seeing both buildings. Seeing that other one all by itself, that was probably the scariest thing the whole day. And then of course it only lasted for about 40 minutes, and then that one came down too.
Yeah, it lasted about 40 minutes, but of course it seemed like an eternity when you really don't know what's going on, what happened, what if this was an accident or was it planned. It was hard to do that, and that changed your whole trajectory, because once that happened, that's when you and your wife decided, okay, we need to move out, right? Was that the catalyst?
Yeah, probably. I mean, we didn't have a lot of family. We had some family in New York and New Jersey. Everybody was about 2 hours away, though. So if we wanted to drive to my wife's parents' house, there was a 2-hour drive out to Long Island. If you wanted to drive to my father's house and my brother's, that was about a 2-hour drive the other way. So we had a lot of friends, but no family that were real close. And my sisters had moved out to Las Vegas a couple years earlier, and one of them had kids about the same age as ours. And I grew up with a lot of cousins, so we were thinking, hey, maybe it'd be nice to have the cousin thing, to have them close by. And that's when she said, "What about Vegas?" And they're like, "What about Vegas?" Otherwise, it never occurred to us to move. Prior to that, we were looking at different houses in New Jersey or different parts of New York or wherever. So it totally changed it. And we've been out here ever since.
Now, do you think, because you mentioned your faith earlier about God giving you other plans, God changing the trajectory, do you think that started back then, and that God knew that MS that diagnosis was going to come later on, so he wanted you in a place where you're able to number one, I'm not really um, caught up on all the symptoms of MS, but I'm sure stress aggravates it as well, and probably the
Yeah.
climate too, like the cold weather, and you have to be worried about your immune system as well. Correct?
Well, as far as stress, yeah, stress is definitely one of the big triggers of MS. So I don't watch the news anymore because that used to drive me crazy. When I was working, I was sort of a news junkie and felt I had to be. If I was giving clients recommendations, I want you to do with their portfolios. I better know what's going on in the world.
Hmm.
But as far as the weather, it's actually the opposite. Heat makes MS worse. So this is
Hmm.
probably now one of the dumber places for me to live in the world, because during the summertime it's just crushing.
Hmm.
The fatigue is just overwhelming. At least my symptoms of MS, the fatigue is overwhelming. So usually just the walk from the house to the car, your air conditioned house to your air conditioned car, and then wherever you're going, to the doctor's office, the supermarket, wherever, that little heat will a lot of times knock me out for the rest of the day, and I'll be in bed for the rest of the day. So this probably isn't the smartest part in the world, or smartest part of the world for me to live. But now we've got a home here, and I don't know if we'll ever live. Maybe ever leave. I try to talk my wife into it, but she really loves it out here now. But as far as God having a plan, I definitely see it. The trick, I think, sometimes is when you have a lot of faith and you're living your daily life, and you try to figure out if you should go left or you should go right. You can't always see the direction that you're supposed to go. But if when I look back on my life, I can definitely see His hand guiding me along the way. When I look back 5 or 10 years, you can see His plan, and you can say, "Oh, that's why that happened," or "Oh, that's why that happened." So when I finally got my diagnosis, I was at Bank of America, and I said, "Thank God for Bank of America," the whole time. I don't know if it's in your part of North Carolina where they've
Yeah, it
taken
is.
over, but
Yeah.
they've definitely taken over. But they had my wife. Now that I had to go out on disability, and my wife and kids could stay on health insurance forever. So luckily, they're covered that way. They had some disability insurance as well, so that helped. And then I had some other investments that helped as well. But I think maybe He was leading me to there so that I would know that I would at least be taken care of that way when I finally did get sick. So yeah, I can see His hand always when I'm looking backwards. You wish you could see the
Uh-huh.
future, and He would tell you, the lotto numbers or whatever, something more meaningful that way, where to go. But but He doesn't always, right? And even
Yeah.
though He's got a plan for us, you can see it when you look back, but it's tougher going forward. So yeah, I could see that He had a plan for me.
So here you are. You're this financial guru. You've worked on Wall Street. What made you decide to step in and write? Because that's a huge gap if you think about it. Because you're a numbers guy, and then knowing what's going on in the world, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm going to write a young adult book.
Yeah, yeah, and a young adult romance. Yeah, it's not. It's definitely not or at least it doesn't appear to be the know what you write type thing, right?
Mhm.
So once I had to leave B of A in the financial world, the first couple of years are very difficult because you keep having it in your mind that, hey, I'm going to beat this thing, and I'm going to get back to work, and this is just going to be temporary, and I'm going to work as hard as I can to get back. And I initially went out, and I went to the Cleveland Clinic. I went to the several times. I went to the Mayo Clinic several times, looking for any other diagnosis besides MS that would say I would still be able to work. I was one of those Type A guys and doing well at work, and thought, hey, life is pretty good to hear. I don't want to stop working, but so the first couple of years, there's a lot of weird soul searching that goes through, but finally you get to the realization that I'm not going to beat the disease. The disease is going to, and as much as you don't like to hear that, sometimes you have to just accept it. And so then I started to think of what else could I do. And I did go out and write a financial textbook for stockbrokers. So that was the first thing. And I found that I enjoyed the process. And then after that, I could have stayed in that field, but after that, I just started to get the desire to write fiction. And I figured I would try my hand at fiction. And I wrote a couple novels, and I would take them to writing groups, sort of those critique groups where you go in and you read for about 10 minutes, and then you get critique from the group. And I was just getting destroyed when I would bring in the stuff. And I remember you would hand out like 10 copies for everybody. And there was one guy, Gordon, in there particularly. He'd be like, "Ray, I'm going to be brutal to you." And I'm like, "All right, go right ahead." And I'd see him just putting big X's through the whole pages. And then he would give me my feedback. And I'd be like, "Oh, yeah, that was brutal. But okay, that's what I came here for." But it happened so many times. I'd be driving home from the writing group and I'm saying, "What am I putting myself through this aggravation for? I don't need to do this." But whatever reason, I just had the desire to keep writing and writing. And then finally, after people will always tell you, you have to find your voice. You have to find your voice. And my first two books were adult fiction, so to speak. But I went to a retreat one time during COVID, and it was one of those classes where the teacher gives you a prompt. She says, write about a dewy meadow, and then everybody in the class writes about a dewy meadow for the next 10 minutes, and then you come back and you read it out loud. And the mystery writers will write about a murder that'll happen in the meadow, and a romance will write about maybe a first kiss during the meadow, and so forth. Well, one of them was write about something that you accidentally overheard. And somebody must have been talking about high school or something before that. And the idea just came to me and said, okay, I'm in first period detention, and I overhear that my ex-girlfriend is selling her prom tickets. And today's the day of the prom. And we broke up about a year ago, and we haven't spoken since, but what should I do? Do I have the courage to ask her? Even if I do ask her, we haven't talked in a long time. She turns the other way when I walk down the hall. She basically hates me right now. So even if she did, she'd probably say no. And I'm a teenage boy, and I hate rejection just as much as everybody else in the world. And I want to have the courage to do it. And that's about all I read for about 10 minutes. And then there was I had a friend in the class at the writing retreat. She's a best-selling author herself. And she emailed me afterwards. And she said, "Ray, I think you really had something there with your story." And I was like, "Which story?" Because we had about 5 or 6. And it didn't occur to me of that one out of the others. And she said, "Oh, the one with the prom." She's like, "I think you really had something there." I said, "Really?" And she's like, "Yeah, I'd like to hear how the rest of that goes out." And she was somebody that I really respected, and it's good to follow the advice of the people that you really respect in life. So I sat down and I wrote the next chapter and the next chapter and the next chapter, and it just flowed out of me. And it really was one of those things where the story wrote itself. And I got through the first draft pretty quickly, and then rewrote it about 10 times. And then I finally had the courage to bring that to the writing group. And instead of hearing the terrible feedback of, hey, you better show, don't tell, or your voice is too passive, or whatever typical negative feedback you normally get from those groups, I'm starting to get things like, hey, that was really funny in this scene, or I felt the angst, or that was a really dramatic scene between Luca and Piper are the two main characters in there. People are laughing out loud, and I was like, oh wow, because normally when you're reading something funny, you might snicker or something a little bit, or curl your lips, but here people are actually laughing out loud with the story. So I'm like, this is different. I'm like, maybe I really do have something here. And that whole thing about finding your voice, it turned out that my voice, I think I finally found it. When you do actually find it, you're like, oh, that's what people are talking about when you find your voice. You know it, but until you actually find it, you don't always know what it means. At least I didn't know what it meant. But when I found it, I'm like, that's what people are talking about. And it turned out that it was young adult. And that's where the young adult. But your question of why from the guy's perspective, I first started to write the book from the girl's perspective, Piper's perspective. And I got about a chapter or two into it, and I was enjoying it very much, writing it that way. But then I was just thinking about it one day, and I was like, just about every other teen romance in the world is written from the girl's perspective.
Right.
So I said, if I want to be a little bit different, I'll write this one from the guy's perspective. I've read almost every young adult book that my daughters had read. So I was very familiar with the genre. And I was like, let me try one from the guy's perspective. And maybe girls would like to know what guys are actually thinking instead of guessing about what we're thinking. This is a little bit clue into what a teenage boy is actually thinking.
Yep. So true on that. So true, because I thought it was really unique that you brought out the guy, because everybody thinks, oh, the guy doesn't have to go through a lot to ask somebody for the prom, but just getting the courage up, especially considering that they had been breaking up for over a year, to get the courage up to ask her was like something that, wow, you really went out there. And it wasn't, and I love the fact that you included like his tribe too with them, the people that were encouraging him, because he didn't have the best relationship with his parents. Because I think teenagers can understand that, hey, if you have a really core group of friends around you and their parents are stepping up, then sometimes that's all the support they have too. Because there's a lot of teenagers that their parents aren't there, or their parents are working all the time, so that they can identify with him as well.
Yeah, it's strange, isn't it, that as teenagers, parents are always desperate to talk to their kids. And a lot of times the way we start the conversation is, how was school today? And I remember somebody telling me that's the dumbest question in the world, because all you ever get is good, fine, okay, and nothing. You think they're going to tell you about everything they learned in school that day, or them talking to a boy or something that happened to their friends, and they're just going to say good and walk up to their room. And that's really not having a conversation with them. But sometimes we do, for whatever reason, talk to our friends' parents a little bit more than our own parents.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's just because we see them all the time and we don't always know how to get into those more meaningful conversations, and it's a little bit easier with a friend's parents. But yeah, Luca in the book definitely connects with his friend Pablo's parents much better than he does with his own. He really doesn't have a bad relationship with his parents. It's just one of those where you just never talk that much, and unfortunately, that's the way it is with a lot of kids.
Yep, that's for sure. We need to take a brief commercial break, but when we come back, you're going to read part of your book, correct?
Yes, I will.
All right.
People welcomed me, and they knew the pain of the journey that we'd been on because they'd been there too.
Other Parents Like Me is an online community, peer-led, for parents with kids struggling with mental health and or substances.
It's a space that's safe. Feels like I can actually share what's going on.
We offer 15 daily support groups per week and live speaker talks on Thursdays, as well as a monthly expert panel.
We also have a resource hub that has a toolkit. This includes over 1,000 articles, podcasts. There's a glossary with the most recent and relevant terms. And we have a directory that's been vetted.
The overwhelming feeling when we're sitting in a meeting and I'm telling my story and I see others shaking their head, tears falling, they understand this roller coaster and they're along for the ride.
And we are back with Ray, who will be reading part of his book, Prom-Posal. So, Ray, I'll give it to you.
Okay, great. Well, here's the book. There we are. That's better. Prom-Posal. There aren't many flashbacks in the book, but this is actually a flash book where Luca is trying to get up the courage to ask Piper to the prom. And he's sitting in class and he's thinking back to their first date. And this was actually while he's thinking about their first kiss. They're standing outside at the car in the freezing cold New York winter. And here we go. These things don't usually happen to me, Her breathing became more audible, with her chest rising and falling. What things? I leaned forward, our lips so close to each other. I'd never pointed to a guy in the hall before and said, I want that one, and now I have you. Was I hers already? The thought set my pulse racing. I shifted my eyes upward. Do you like constellation? Orion the Hunter's right above you. When Piper looked up, I caressed the side of her face. She closed her eyes and cuddled her cheek into my palm. Our lips finally pushed against each other, testing the connection. At first it was soft and delicate, then lightning struck. The kissing deepened, tasting, daring a little further, and the gentle stroke of her tongue on mine. Piper pulled me closer, conveying her willingness. Then she pressed herself against me. My body felt a warm rush of pleasure, and I learned how sexy she was. This wasn't just a kiss. We were beyond it, making out as only young lovers do. My tongue danced in her mouth, and hers flittered in mine. I don't know how long it lasted, but I loved every moment. Wow, I said when we finally parted, and stared into her eyes. Her cheeks flushed. How would she manage this? One minute, I was thinking about breaking up with her, and then the next, I had fallen for her. Would she always control me so easily? That's it.
I love that. So Prom-Posal, who did you base your characters on?
Who did I base my characters on? A little bit on me. My wife, it's funny, my wife kept asking me which ex-girlfriend she's based on. Based on. And I keep saying to her, none, I swear, honey, that it's none of my ex-girlfriends. And Piper is a year older. Luca's in 11th grade and Piper's in a senior, and this is the day of the senior prom. And she's selling her tickets. And she's like, but I know you dated a girl that was older than you. I was like, oh, yeah, well, that doesn't matter. So maybe I wasn't 1,000% honest with her. That maybe it was based a little bit on one of my ex-girlfriends. But and I think Luca's a little bit of me, but Luca's also way cooler than I ever was. Luca's sort of, if I could have been really cool in high school, I think that's who I would have been.
So you kind of projected who you really wanted to be in high school onto Luca so that you could live vicariously through him.
Yeah, a little bit. It was one of those things where you're in a conversation with someone, and then when you leave or you're driving home, you're like, oh, I wish I had said this, or I wish I had said that. Well, that's the great thing about being a writer, is that you can actually think about what the character should say, and you can put in that good line. You can put in that good romantic line, or you can put in that good zinger when you're up against the bad guy too. So yeah, if I was as cool as somebody, I'd like to be as cool as Luca, but I'm not.
Yeah, I love the fact that you have him having a really good friend, and you also show all the steps that guys and girls have to do to get ready for prom. Because basically he was like, I'm just going to wear whatever. I just got a suit. I'm going to wear that. And she's like, no, you're going to do the tuxedo, because a lot of girls want that picture perfect picture at prom. And she's like, no, you're going to do the tuxedo. You're going to do this. You're going to do that. We're going in the limo. I'll drive, but if there's room in the limo, we're going in the limo, and all this other stuff. And then things happen to them that sometimes it's a little bit out of their control, that they had to learn. They adapted. So things weren't always like, when teenagers, they think it's the end of the world when something happens. But you show in the book that they can adapt to a situation and kind of move around a little bit different. And sometimes it's better than what they thought they were going to end up, the outcome they were going to end up with.
Yeah, that was the second part of the challenge, was that one, Luca has to try to get the courage to ask Piper to the prom. But just because he asks her doesn't mean that she's going to say yes. But if she does say yes, then today's the day of the prom. How are they going to find a dress for her and the tuxedo? And he wants to give her the ideal, whatever the ideal is, prom experience. Yeah. So he wants to give her the ideal experience. So we've got to now and then in just a few hours find the dress and the tux, and go for pictures and get the limo, and find out what your friends are doing, and try to accomplish all of those things. And then in the meantime, the football team has warned them that, hey, if you guys show up at the prom, we're going to beat you. You guys are going to get beat up, because the football team wants to beat up Luca's best friends and Pablo. And so if they show up at the prom, there's a big threat of getting beat up, and a big fight that's going to happen at the prom. So they have a ton of challenges ahead of them. The first, of course, is getting Piper to agree to go. But she does agree. Otherwise, there wouldn't be much of a book, right? But
Yep.
then the next challenge is how to get how to get it all done, and how to try to give Piper that great time where he's starting to realize that, hey, maybe I was kind of dumb to let this one go. Maybe this was a girl that I always thought that as a guy, oh, there'll be another girl. That's one thing that guys think of, is that guys have this weird level of confidence, even in high school, that, oh, there'll be another girl. Oh, there'll be another girl, and there'll be another girl. And so if I break up with this one, it's not always a big deal, but sometimes there isn't another girl right around the corner. And that was one of the challenges that he started to learn about.
I love how your characters are not, they're very complex, like most teenagers are. You don't really know what they're thinking, but I also love the fact that you interwove the relationship between Luca and Piper, and then Luca and his best friends, and then you have the underlying sort of conflict between the football team, and you wrap that up so nicely in the bow, though. It's like you didn't ever feel like, wait a second, what happened? Because sometimes when you read a book, you're like, when did that come in? But you wrapped it up so nicely that even in a chapter that you were talking about her finding the dress and everything else, you actually have some football members, and when going in the tux, you intertwine that throughout the book, and I love that, because it's not out of the blue all of a sudden something's going to happen. You started it at the beginning, and you kept building on it until it got to the end for the conflict.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. That's if we watch movies or even read books a lot about teens, a lot of times you see them making decisions on their own. Like a big decision for a teen would be, hey, should I ask this girl to the prom or not? But most teens don't have the courage, or at least my experience of it was, you don't always have the courage to do it by yourself. You have the courage when your friends are along, or your friends are going to be part of it, or at least to have the conversation with them, because you're not sure of, hey, is this really happening? Would this be the right thing? What if I do get rejected? Is everybody in school going to know about it? And will everybody be making fun of me on Monday? Even in that Grease song, right? Where when Sandy leaves Danny stranded at the drive-in, and he's asking himself, what will they think Monday at school? So kids have a million thoughts going through their minds, and a lot of times they think that the world does come to the end if they get rejected, or if they face this trouble along the way. They want everything to work out perfectly. And when it doesn't, first thing they go for a lot of times are their friends, and to lean on their friends and say, hey, should I ask this girl? How do I get through this? We're going to get it. The football team wants to beat me up. Can you be there as a wingman, and to try to you lean on your buddies, guys and girls will both do it. I'm the father of 3 daughters, so I've seen them lean on their friends like crazy. So I wanted that to be as realistic, I think, as possible. And the big crux of Prom-Posal was really, it's just supposed to be a fun, enjoyable story that hopefully people fly through and read through very quickly. And it was pure entertainment. So I tried to keep every lesson I learned in the writing groups and in the writing retreats, and how to weave characters in, and how to keep the plot lines going, and that type of thing. And maybe since I'm so new, that I follow the formula a little bit closer than others. And so thank you for your compliment that everything went through. And almost everybody who's read the book afterwards is like, I'm dying to know what happens with these 2 next.
Yes, that was going to be a question that I was going to ask you. What is going to happen to Luca and Piper next?
Well, thank goodness my publisher offered me a contract for the next book. So the next book, yeah. So yes, thank you very much. So the next book is at my editor right now. So hopefully everybody will be finding out early 2025. But their story does not end at the end of Prom-Posal. She's I'll give you a little preview of it. is that Piper is the year older, so she's going off to college, and Luca is still going to be in high school. So there's the challenge of how do you make a long distance relationship work? That's what a lot of us have gone through, and it doesn't always work out great for everybody. But there's a lot of challenges that go through with that, for sure.
For sure. Now, how much research did you do to make sure that you were getting right? Because I know having children our same ages, it's like a long time ago we were teens, so we wanted to make sure that what the teenagers, young adults are reading is relevant to what they're going through. So how much input, how much research? I'm thinking, did you sit down with your daughters and say, hey, read this and tell me if it sounds true to what's going on? How much input they had, how much research you did on your own?
Yeah, well, one, I had just survived, 6 proms, right? They each had, in our schools, I think they had juniors and senior proms. So they had, so I survived 6 proms between all the girls. So I had a lot of experience with that going on. But my daughters and I, we do have a really good relationship where we are good friends, as well as not just mom and dad. You hear that a lot from people that, oh, you can't be friends with your kids, you have to be parents with your kids, and I don't think that's true. I think you can do both. I think you can punish your kids when they screw up and ground them when they screw up and yell at them when they screw up, and then you can still go on the roller coaster with them when you go to the amusement park and ride together and do both. So so we talked a lot. So I've heard a lot of their stories. Some of them had boyfriends in high school, and others just dated people in high school. So I got to see that going on. I did let them read the book. It took a while of whether I should let them read the book or not. It's not. There's nothing any untoward in the book. Maybe the juiciest scene might have been the first kiss scene that I just read before. Mm-hmm. There's nothing salacious beyond that. At our launch party, I had a couple priests and ministers at the launch party, and I read that scene out loud. Some people made fun of me for reading that scene out loud, but I asked ahead of time, and they're like, "Yeah, they all had their first kiss at one time too." So go ahead and read it. But yeah, a lot of the kids read it, and I got the feedback from them, and so some of the storylines did change from it. But I was also lucky that in the writing groups that I'm in, we had some younger kids in there. I'm calling them kids, but in their 20s, that could give me a little bit more feedback on. Somebody wouldn't really say that anymore, or sometimes people I'd get the feedback, that sounds like an adult would say that, as opposed to a 16-year-old boy. So then I'd go back and then I'd ask my daughters, does this sound right? Would somebody say this, or would somebody say that, or does somebody know this band, or would somebody not know that band, or that type of thing. So a lot of feedback from my kids, but a lot from the writing groups too.
Now, you talked about your wife is trying to figure out which ex-girlfriend it was, but what was the overall response from your wife and your girls from when they got the book in their hand and they were like, my husband wrote this book? What was that like?
My kids, I told them when they are going to read this, I'm like, when you read this, you can't be thinking, oh, I didn't know Daddy thought that way, or I didn't know my dad. That's what my dad thinks all the time. I said, no, if you're going to read this, you're going to have to say, I wrote this from the perspective of, I'm trying to make this an entertaining book for kids, or for teenagers, young adults. So they told me, okay, yes, we'll all do that. After the fact, some of them said they had a little bit trouble, like with that first kiss scene and so forth, of reading it. My wife, yeah, her too. Her too, a little bit. I'll be honest. I get the comments of, oh, that's how you found your voice, because you still act like a 16-year-old boy half the time. So no wonder you write young adult romance. No big surprise there. But they all enjoyed it. They all, when we had our launch party, they were all spread around the country. They all lived in different parts of the country: Oregon, Texas, and up in Reno, Nevada, and everybody flew home from the party, and they were great at the party, and they were sort of like the hosts. My daughters and my wife were the hosts of the party, so they've been big cheerleaders, but they do admit after the fact now that they cringed a little bit sometimes, and I was like, well, I don't know if I'm going to let you read the next one then. I don't know if I'm going to believe you when you say you'll just accept it, that it was just the story, not how Daddy thinks.
That's funny. So you talked about the second book for Piper and Luca. Are you going to branch out and write any other kind of books, or you think your young adult romance is what you're going to stick with?
No, thank you for asking that one. Well, my publisher, we talked a little bit about trying a dystopian, actually. So right now we're in the editing phase of the second book, but a lot of times in the editing phase, there's dead time for the writer because the book is back at the publisher and back at the editor, and you're waiting for feedback from them. And sometimes, a couple months will go by. So I'm sort of in that phase right now. So I'm trying my hand at a dystopian in the future. It'll be young adult dystopian. It'll be loosely based off of Macbeth. And I'm trying to put that together right now. I'm about 2/3 of the way done. It's very strange, though, because you have to switch back and forth. That one's not going to be funny, where I like to think that Prom-Posal is funny, and the second one is going to be even funnier. The dystopian, there's a couple snarky jokes in there like that, but it's mainly bad things happen to teenagers, and how are they going to survive in it. Without getting too crazy and too violent and too, gory and so forth. So I have. I'm trying my hand at a dystopian. You know what? One time I took one of the chapters into the writing group, and I'm trying to think of horrible situations to put these kids into, right? And at that writing group that day, it was a Saturday, and one of the other people in there was writing a historical fiction on Bosnia and Serbia in the 90s. And as they're reading their piece out, I'm like, wow, that's way worse than anything I just wrote. And someone else was writing a nonfiction piece and about what was going on in Africa at one point. And I was like, wow, that's way worse than what I was writing. So here I am trying to think of all these horrible situations to put people into. And then I'm sitting around the room and I'm thinking, depending on where you live in the world, you are living in a dystopian, right? If you're living in Israel or Ukraine or different parts of Africa or even South America, you're living in the dystopian world. So it's things are much nicer here in America, but or Haiti. It's not like that every place else. Yeah, some places it is worse. And it was actually the day when Iran had launched like those 300 drones at Israel. And Israel shot most of them down. But as I was actually making that observation in the writing group, and one of the other guys put his hand up and he's looking at his phone and he's like, "Oh, by the way, Iran is bombing Israel at the moment." And I was like, "Yeah." So we always have to be lucky, or always have to remember how lucky we are that we're in this country instead of someplace else.
For sure. Now, our time is almost up. Before we talk about where people can find you and where they can find the book, is there one thing that we touched on that you want to reemphasize, or maybe there's something that we didn't touch on that you would like to say? This is your last little nugget that you can share with us.
My last little nugget. I guess just sometimes people will ask me, how did you get through writing while being while trying to tackle a disease like MS and so forth. And I guess I just wanted to reemphasize my faith in there, that's what really got me through this. My wife and my daughters got me through this. If I had to go through this without them, it would be really, really, really difficult. But if I had to try to get through this without God, I don't know how I would be able to do it, because every day is a struggle. Just like every day is a struggle in our regular lives, whether you're sick or not. We all have our struggles. We all have our challenges. You struggle, I struggle. We all have our struggles in life, but it's how you get through them. And it's it's really my faith in Jesus and my faith in God that gets me through it and keeps me going. It kept me going before I ever tried to be a writer, but it keeps me going now that I have this challenge of MS in my life, that I wouldn't be able to do it if it was just by myself. And I don't know how people try to do it by themselves. And I'm a lucky guy that I have him to get me through it all.
I love that. Now, where can people find the book?
Oh, okay. It's Amazon and Barnes and Nobles and Barnes and Noble, just about every place else. I have a website, rhbird.com. You can get it there, but Amazon and Barnes and Noble are the easiest places, easiest place to get it.
And then you talked about your website, which is rhbird.com, but where else can people find you?
Oh, okay. TikTok at rhbirdauthor. I threw in the author at the end. At rhbirdauthor, Facebook, Instagram. I was never a big social media guy. I'll tell you that one of my daughters, I won't go into the full story, one of my daughters got into big trouble when she was around 12, and we banished all social media from the house. So that included the parents. I didn't have anything either. So I was really a complete social media novice, as green as you could possibly be. And then all of a sudden you write a book and you're like, hey, you've got to get on social media. So starting from brand new, but at rhbirdauthor and TikTok and Instagram, all three of them are big, but especially TikTok and Instagram for the young adult world.
Yeah. And your book again is called Prom-Posal. It's available on Amazon. Ray, thank you so much for coming on and for sharing, for writing the book, first of all, from a guy's point of view, because I think it's like you said, it would be very helpful for girls to know what the guys are thinking, because they're like, and now somebody needs to just write a book for guys that's a handbook for women so they know what women are thinking as well. But thank you for writing this book and for sharing your story and taking something that could have easily left you into bed and just completely changed the trajectory of your life, but changed it and you found something positive in it and inspirational by writing books. And I applaud you for that.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. And thank you for your podcast too. Like I was telling you before we got on here, I'm a big fan of your podcast. Right now, I've been listening to it every night when I walk my dog. I love the stories that you have on here. Very inspirational, not just the authors, but you've got a lot of really great inspirational stuff on there. And I'm now a big fan for life.
All right. Thank you. And guys, I will put everywhere in the show notes, everywhere where you can find Ray, as well as finding Prom-Posal. Of course, I always have the Amazon link up there. But thank you once again, Ray, for coming on.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. Bye-bye.
Okay, until next time. Bye, guys.